Star Wars 7 by 7 episode 2538. There's been a leak of photos from the Obi-Wan Kenobi set, and I checked them out, so you don't have to if you don't want to. And I can tell you what was involved in these photos without any spoilers whatsoever. And honestly, there's not really a lot to them anyway, but I'll explain. Punch it! Hey Rebel Rouser, I'm Alan Voivod, and this is Star Wars 7 by 7, your daily dose of Star Wars joy, and thank you so much for joining me for it. So, there's a website that specializes in these sorts of things. It's Just Jared or something like that. And there are more than 90 photos kicking around of people walking from trailers to a set or something like that on the quote-unquote studio lot, which basically makes you think that, you know, when you think about, for example, The Mandalorian Season 1 and how there is that back lot in the filming where we had that climactic scene with Moff Gideon showing up with all the stormtroopers and our heroes trapped inside the little cantina on Navarro and him threatening them and all that stuff, right? Like, it seems like that's the kind of studio lot we're talking about, although people are crossing a street, it looks like, which seems kind of unusual, like why they wouldn't just have them within the confines of the studio and, you know, kept separate or anything like that. I don't know. But, you know, if you think back to that situation that happened a month or two ago where somebody somehow was driving around on an Obi-Wan Kenobi set, or what was purported to be an Obi-Wan Kenobi set, but it was actually an on-location kind of thing. Well, this is definitely not in the same location, because that was out in the comparative wilderness in LA, or what passes for it. And this was definitely more of an urban setting by comparison. Now, the thing about these photos is that for most of them, most of the people that you see in them have robes wrapped around themselves, so you can't actually see their costumes, or at least not with, you know, any specific level of detail. Ewan McGregor is pictured in these, as you would expect him to be, and he's masked, actually. He has a COVID mask on, but, you know, we know what he looks like because we just saw him in that Actors on Actors thing, so it's not like, you know, he's hiding a goatee, you know, or something like that. No, it's not anything weird like that. But, you know, we know that he's got, you know, Jedi Master-ish kind of stuff. We saw what he looked like in A New Hope. We saw what he looked like when he showed up on Tatooine in Revenge of the Sith. So it's not like we're expecting anything unusual to be under those robes, right? So, you know, you see maybe a bit of a sleeve or a bit of a pant leg, but, you know, that's it. And no props, like no lightsabers, no blasters, no nothing. In fact, he's just carrying around a book like he's got, you know, his casual reading happening, basically. So yeah, it's not really spoilery in that sense. There are other actors who are depicted, and as we've, you know, talked about with the Actors on Actors segment with him talking with Pedro Pascal, Ewan McGregor's already said publicly, like, he saw a stormtrooper on set, and, you know, just how that affected him, and just, you know, going back to that feeling of being 6 years old again. And there is somebody who had what looked to be stormtrooper armor underneath his robe, so, you know, there you go. Like, you know, again, that's not really spoilery, we kind of expect it. The one thing that, you know, like, if you are completely like, I don't want to hear any single thing, la 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 la, period, paragraph, then, you know, this is a point where you can say, okay, maybe I'll jump ahead like a minute or two. But I'll put it this way before you do, okay? You know that he's going to be on Tatooine, and you know that there are Tusken Raiders on Tatooine, so if you saw, you know, somebody walking around in a Tusken Raider outfit, you'd be like, oh yeah, well, that makes sense. Like, that wouldn't spoil anything. Well, no, I'm not. I'm just trying to give you an analogy for what I'm about to say, and this will be the point at which you can skip ahead like 30 seconds or so. But there were a couple of people who appear to be wearing Imperial officer uniforms, and we know that there's going to be some Imperial contact because there's somebody in a Stormtrooper costume, so somebody in Imperial officer costume, that's not a surprise. Now, assuming that everybody who may have skipped ahead 30 seconds is catching up with us, I will simply say, and this is still back into the fully, utterly, completely non-spoiler territory, that anybody wearing a particular costume that you see walking around, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's indicative of who that person is. And just for the fun of it, I'll give you an example. Let's say that when we saw Jyn Erso wearing an Imperial officer's uniform, or I'm sorry, not an Imperial officer, she was a pilot of some kind, or Diego Luna as Cassian Andor wearing an Imperial officer's uniform in Rogue One, right? Like, we may have seen that in trailers, but we know that that's not who the characters actually are. So anyone that you're seeing, if you decide to go look at the photos, aside from Ewan himself, anyone that you're looking at in uniform, that doesn't necessarily mean, or in costume, I should say, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's who that person actually is. And I have seen a couple of reports saying that, this person is actually this actor who isn't Ewan McGregor, who is somebody else. And it's really kind of hard to tell because of actually hoods on these robes, and not costume hoods, but actual like protective, avoiding photo, hoods and, stuff like that. So I personally am not willing to say that, this person who was cast in it is playing this kind of character or anything like that. I won't go that far myself. But if you want to pursue that, that's out there on sites like Star Wars Newsnet, which is usually a very reputable site as far as these things go. But ultimately, as far as the photos, having looked at the 90 plus photos that this Just Jared site posted, most of them are actually really like the same photo over and over again, just sort of different zooms and different orientations, portrait versus landscape. It's really only kind of like a dozen photos in actuality, and just clicking through them, it's like, oh, there's Ewan in mid-stride again, and oh, there's Ewan in that same mid-stride, but just, further out and not zoomed in. Oh, there he is in that mid-stride, but it's like, head and shoulders now. It's really not nearly as significant a leak as is advertised, I guess. So yeah, 90 plus photos, maybe really only a dozen actual unique ones. So if you're curious and just, can't stand it, like, I want to look, but I don't want to look, I can tell you that it's pretty safe to look and you're not really going to be spoiling yourself at all. But if you have been like, I'm so curious, but I'm definitely not going to look, well, hopefully then this assuages your curiosity about them. And there you go. That's what I've got for you about the Obi-Wan Kenobi set photos leak, as it were. Not nearly as big a deal as potentially advertised, sort of, tempest in a teapot kind of things. And that's what I've got for you for today's episode of the show. It just remains for me to say thank you so much for joining me for it, as always, and may the Force be with you wherever in the world you may be.
7x7 is not endorsed or sponsored yet by Lucasfilm Limited, Disney, or 20th Century Fox, and is intended for entertainment and information purposes only. Star Wars, the Star Wars logo, all names and pictures of Star Wars characters, vehicles, and any other Star Wars-related items are registered trademarks and/or copyrights of Lucasfilm Limited, or their respective trademark and copyright holders. May the Force be with them. All original content is copyright 2021 by Star Wars 7x7. We hope you love it.